I never imagined my life would change so drastically. It all began with my neighbor Mark, who always wore a smirk as if he knew something I didn't. He was charismatic, sure, but in a way that made you question if he was being sincere or just playing games. I had seen him around the building for months, always greeting me with a wave, making small talk, and occasionally hinting that he was interested in me. I never took him seriously. After all, guys like him just talk big, right? Or so I thought. Mark lived just 2 doors down from me, and our paths crossed more often than I'd have liked. He'd show up at the most random times, when I was taking out the trash, checking the mail, or simply sitting on my balcony, sipping my coffee. He'd lean over the railing, his shirt slightly unbuttoned, and say something like, "You're the most beautiful woman in this building, maybe even the whole city." I'd laugh, roll my eyes, and tell him to stop being silly. But deep inside, I couldn't deny that there was something about him that caught my attention. Perhaps it was his confidence, or the way his eyes seemed to see right through me. Whatever it was, it made me feel uneasy. One evening, after a long day at work, I was lounging on my couch, watching a show, when I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before peeking through the peephole. It was Mark, holding a bottle of wine, that same smirk plastered on his face. "Hey, neighbor," he said when I opened the door. "I noticed you had a rough day and thought you could use some company." I raised an eyebrow. "How exactly did you notice I had a rough day?" He shrugged. "I pay attention. Plus, you looked stressed when you got home earlier. So, what do you say? A little wine? A little conversation? No strings attached." I should have said no. I should have closed the door and gone back to my show. But something about the way he looked at me made it hard to say no. Maybe I was lonely. Maybe I was curious. Or maybe I just wanted to figure out what he was really about. We sat on my couch, sipping wine and chatting about anything and everything. He was surprisingly easy to talk to, and before I knew it, hours had passed. The conversation eventually shifted to relationships, and that's when he dropped the bomb. "I have a crush on you," he said casually, as if he were commenting on the weather. I laughed, thinking he was joking. "Yeah, right. You say that to all the girls, don't you?" He leaned in closer, his eyes locking with mine. "I'm serious. I've been trying to get your attention for months, but you keep brushing me off. I get it. You think I'm just playing games, but I'm not. I really like you." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to believe him, but another part screamed that this was a terrible idea. I told him I wasn't looking for anything serious, and he seemed to accept that. But as the night wore on, the tension between us only grew. There were moments when I caught him staring at me, his gaze intense, and I had to look away before I got lost in it. When he finally left, I felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief because I knew getting involved with him would complicate things, and disappointment because, well, there was a part of me that wanted to see where this could lead. A few weeks later, I was having one of those days, feeling bloated, irritable, and just plain miserable. I had no energy for anything other than lying in bed and wallowing in self-pity. That's when Mark showed up again. He knocked on my door, and when I opened it, there he was, holding a bag of groceries. "I thought you could use some comfort food," he said, holding up the bag with chocolate chips and your favorite ice cream. I was too exhausted to argue, so I let him in. He made himself at home in my kitchen, preparing a snack for me while I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. When he brought the food over, he sat down next to me, closer than I expected. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, and it made my heart race. "You know," he said in a low voice, "you're even more beautiful when you're not trying." I rolled my eyes, but couldn't suppress the smile that tugged at my lips. "You're such a flirt, only with you," he responded seriously. We sat in silence for a while, eating the snacks he'd brought. Then, out of nowhere, he stood up and started taking off his clothes. I froze, unsure of what was happening. He removed his shirt, revealing his toned chest, and then unbuckled his belt. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer. Instead, he dropped his pants, and that's when I saw it, his big tool, as he called it. I was stunned, my breath catching in my throat. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. My mind was a whirlwind of chaos, thoughts scattering like leaves in a storm. I had no idea what to do or say. Every rational part of me screamed to stop him, to push him away, to close my eyes and pretend this wasn't happening. But my body betrayed me. A heat spread through me, starting low in my stomach and radiating outward, making my skin tingle and my limbs feel heavy. My pulse quickened, and I felt the flush creeping up my neck, betraying the desire I was desperately trying to suppress. I wanted to look away, to deny what was happening, but I couldn't. My eyes were fixed on him, drawn to him in a way I couldn't explain. "I told you I liked you," he said, his voice steady, almost calm, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "And I meant it. I want you, and I know you want me too." His words lingered between us, heavy and undeniable. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was mistaken, to laugh it off and act like it was some absurd joke. But deep down, I knew he wasn't wrong. The truth was, despite every rational thought, despite every internal warning blaring in my mind, I wanted him. I wanted him more than I had ever wanted anyone before. The realization hit me like a sudden blow, knocking the air from my lungs and leaving me dazed. I parted my lips, intending to speak, to say something, anything that might put an end to this. But no words surfaced. My voice had abandoned me, swallowed by the storm of emotions raging within. And then, before I could regain control, before I could think about stopping myself, I surrendered. What followed was a whirlwind. 1 second, we were standing there, the charged tension between us, almost tangible. The next, we were lost in each other, the world around us fading into insignificance. I didn't resist. I couldn't. My body reacted instinctively, responding in ways I hadn't known it was capable of. We lost ourselves completely, the intensity of it all consuming us. It was overpowering, unlike anything I had ever known. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was alive, fully, completely alive. Every nerve tingled, every thought was drowned out by him. Nothing outside this moment mattered. Not the consequences, not the complications, just this feeling, this unfiltered, raw passion that I hadn't even realized I had been craving. It was everything I hadn't known I needed. Yet, even as I let go, a small voice in the back of my mind screamed at me, warning me that I had made a mistake, that I had crossed a line I could never undo. I ignored it. I buried it beneath the weight of my longing and let myself fall. When it was over, I lay there, breath coming in shallow gasps, my skin still tingling from his touch. The room was silent, the only sound the steady rhythm of our breathing. He was beside me, his arm draped over my waist, his warmth seeping into my skin. For a fleeting moment, I let myself believe this was okay, that this was what I wanted. But then reality slammed into me, bringing with it a wave of regret so intense it left me breathless. What had I done? I had crossed a boundary I knew I shouldn't have. I had given in to something I knew was wrong, something I knew would make everything more complicated. And now there was no undoing it. I turned my head, my gaze settling on him. His face was peaceful, relaxed in the aftermath of what we had shared. He looked content, as though this was exactly where he was meant to be. Maybe for him it was, but for me, it felt as if I were standing on the edge of a precipice, dangerously close to tumbling over. I wanted to say something, to shatter the thick silence hanging between us. But what could I say? That I regretted it? That it had been a mistake? The words refused to come, sticking in my throat, because the truth was, I wasn't sure if I regretted it at all. I wasn't sure if it had been a mistake. The only thing I knew for certain was that I was terrified. Terrified of what this meant, of what would come next, of the feelings I had no control over. He stirred beside me, his eyelids fluttering open. His eyes met mine, his expression soft yet intense, as if he wanted to say something. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to my forehead, the tenderness of it making my chest ache. Then, without a word, he got up and began to dress. I watched him, my mind racing, emotions tangled into a chaotic mess. I wanted to stop him, to ask him to stay, to tell him I didn't know what this was, but I wasn't ready for it to end. But the words wouldn't come. When he was dressed, he turned to me, his face unreadable. "I'll see you around," he said, his tone quiet yet firm. And then he was gone, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the weight of what we had done. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning. The room seemed colder now, emptier, as though his presence had taken all the warmth with him. I replayed everything over and over in my head. Every touch, every kiss, every electrifying moment, trying to make sense of it. But I couldn't. It was like attempting to complete a puzzle with missing pieces. I wanted to convince myself that this had been nothing more than a lapse in judgment, a fleeting moment of weakness, something I could brush off and move past. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't just physical. It wasn't just desire. There was something deeper, something I wasn't prepared to confront. And no matter how much I tried to pretend, this changed nothing. I knew it did. I had crossed a threshold, and there was no undoing it. Mark had stayed the night, and when I woke the next morning, he was gone. A note sat on my nightstand, scrawled in his familiar handwriting. Last night was incredible. Let's do it again sometime. I didn't know how to react. Part of me wanted to erase the whole thing from my memory, pretend it never happened. But another part of me wanted more. For days, I avoided him. But it was impossible. He was everywhere, and every time I saw him, I was reminded of what we had done. Eventually, I confronted him. "What are we doing?" I demanded. "Whatever this is, it can't happen again." He studied me, his face unreadable. "Why not? You enjoyed it as much as I did." "That's not the point," I said, my voice unsteady. "This is complicated. You're my neighbor. What if things go wrong? What if we ruin everything?" He stepped closer, his gaze locked onto mine. "Or what if we make it better?" I had no answer. As much as I wanted to walk away, I couldn't. There was something about Mark that pulled me in, something I couldn't resist. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, we fell into an unspoken pattern. Nights were spent tangled together, exploring each other in ways I had never imagined. But by day, we pretended nothing had changed. It was exhilarating but exhausting, the constant fear of being discovered lingering in the back of my mind. One evening, I returned home from work to find Mark waiting for me in my apartment. He had a key, one I had somehow been convinced to give him, and he sat on my couch, his expression serious. "We need to talk," he said. My heart plummeted. I had known this discussion was inevitable, yet I still wasn't prepared for it. "About what?" I asked. "About us," he answered. "I can't keep doing this. I want more. I want you." I was at a loss for words, my mind swirling with emotions battling for control. I cared about him more than I was willing to acknowledge, but the thought of a relationship terrified me. They were complicated, messy, and more often than not, ended in heartache. I had been down that road before, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to travel it again. "Mark, My voice faltered, the words catching in my throat. I lifted my gaze to meet his, those deep, penetrating eyes that always seemed to see right through me. "I don't know if I can give you what you want." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood, his movements slow and deliberate, like a hunter stalking its prey. He approached, each step echoing in the silence. When he was near enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, he stopped, his eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "You don't have to decide right now," he said, his voice both gentle and firm. "Just think about it, because I'm not going anywhere." His words lingered in the space between us, heavy with significance. I wanted to believe him, to trust that he meant it. But a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that this was just another game to him, one I wasn't sure I wanted to play. He reached out, his fingers lightly grazing my cheek, in a gesture so soft it made my chest ache. "I know you're scared," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you don't have to be. Not with me." I wanted to argue, to tell him he didn't understand, but he did. He understood me in a way no one else ever had, and that terrified me more than anything. Then, just as suddenly, he withdrew, leaving me breathless and bewildered. He cast me one last glance, his eyes reflecting both yearning and determination, before turning and walking away. The moment the door shut behind him, I felt his absence like a weight pressing down on me. The room, once full of life, now seemed cold and vacant. My legs barely held me as I collapsed onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. My mind reeled, thoughts and emotions colliding in a chaotic storm. I replayed his words over and over, trying to make sense of them. I'm not going anywhere. What did that mean? Was he sincere, or was this just another one of his mind games? I wanted to believe him, I truly did. But doubt, my ever-present shadow, refused to let go. I thought about the nights we had spent together, about how he made me feel alive in ways I hadn't in years. I thought about the way he looked at me, as if I were the only person in the world who mattered. And I thought about his touch, gentle yet possessive, as if afraid I might slip away. But then came the inevitable fears. What if this didn't work out? What if we ruined everything? What if I ended up hurt? The questions haunted me, each one more frightening than the last. Days turned into weeks, yet his words continued to echo in my head. Though he never brought it up again, I could feel the tension between us whenever we were together. A silent struggle, each of us pulling in opposite directions, neither willing to let go. I tried to distract myself, throwing myself into work and spending more time with friends. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape him. He was everywhere, a constant presence lingering in my mind. One night, after an exhausting day, I arrived home to find him waiting outside my apartment. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a look of determination etched into his face. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady. I sighed, too drained to argue. "Okay, but can we do this inside? I'm exhausted." He nodded and followed me in. I dropped my bag and collapsed onto the couch, my body aching with fatigue. He sat beside me, his presence both reassuring and unsettling. "I can't keep doing this," he finally said, breaking the silence. "This? Whatever this is, it's tearing me apart." I looked at him, startled by the raw emotion in his voice. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I can't keep pretending that this is enough," he said, frustration flickering in his eyes. "I want more. I want you, and I need to know if you feel the same." I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know what I felt. All I knew was that I was scared. Scared of getting hurt. Scared of losing him. Scared of taking the risk. He reached for me, his hand gently cupping my face. "I know you're scared," he said softly, "but you don't have to be. Not with me. I'm not going anywhere." His words echoed in my mind, and for the first time, I let myself believe them. I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, this could work. that maybe he was worth the risk. My heart pounded as I took a deep breath. "Okay," I whispered, "let's try." A slow smile spread across his face, reaching his eyes and lighting up his entire expression. He leaned in, pressing his lips to mine in a kiss filled with hope and promise. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. But as much as I wanted to believe everything would be fine, I knew this was only the beginning. Relationships were never easy, and ours would be no exception. There would be obstacles, doubts, and difficult moments. But for the first time, I was willing to take that leap, because sometimes the things that frighten us the most are the very things worth fighting for. And Mark, he was worth it.